Thank you. Mukure, can you hear me?
Apologies for that. I had a small issue, but thank you so much, Rehema. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Welcome, a very, very warm welcome to this webinar hosted by GBPN, which is the Global Buildings Performance Network. My name is Mugure Jendu, and I am the Africa Programs Lead for GBPN. And I am very, very honored to be your host today. So before we dive in, I think Rehema has noted the few housekeeping items, but I want to encourage everyone that we have an interactive session. So please feel free to use the Q&A box as the webinar continues. Please use that to submit any questions as the presentations are made. When they're fresh in your mind, we'll be saving a dedicated block of time right at the end to answer any of the questions that you have, as many of them as we can. So with that said, let's get started. We're excited to have you here, and I'm very happy to set the scene for this discussion. A regional exchange on operationalizing building sector NDCs in Africa. In the global climate conversation, I think all eyes, of course, right now were turned to COP30 in Belém, and that particular theme for COP30 was titled Global Mocheraun, which means collective efforts. The world is really just being called to unite for climate action, and it's a call well known here in the African continent. I think across the board in the various countries, we all have some proverbs or parables that have something similar, and one that may be quite familiar to most people on the call, which is if you want to go quickly, you go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Faith, thank you so much for reminding me of that wonderful quote about a week ago. And this is really the context that GBPN convenes this knowledge exchange in, a knowledge exchange to learn from each other. Africa's construction sector is really at the heart of the continent's decarbonization agenda. We have a confluence of challenges and opportunities, from rapid urbanization, rising climate risks, and then some structural vulnerabilities in housing and infrastructure. Buildings on the continent already account for about 30% of carbon emissions in many countries, and we expect our population to double rapidly. By 2050 expected a double. And we still also have about 70% of our building stock yet to be built as a continent. So the scale of demand for housing and infrastructure ahead is really, really quite huge. But our urban story is not just about carbon. It's also about resilience, it's about affordability, and it's about the chance to choose. It's for us to choose as a continent that we either lock in vulnerability and emissions for decades and really spend a lot of time and money trying to correct what we do wrong, or we seize the opportunity to build differently and to shape climate smart, inclusive cities for the future. So NDC's nationally determined contributions provide this framework for countries to respond to these challenges and opportunities, to align our building and construction sectors with clear climate targets and development targets. Yet the approaches vary widely, and that's the great conversation we'll be having here today. We have 3 African countries represented who are leading the way in translating commitments into practice, leveraging the building sectors in different ways to address decarbonization. And in doing so, yes, addressing decarbonization, but strengthening resilience, improving affordability, and delivering more inclusive growth. So the regional exchange will cover Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. So as a start to this conversation, I mentioned GBPN, but I haven't talked too much about who we are and what we do. I would like to pass that baton over to our executive director who's on the call, Dr. Peter Graham. And Peter, allow me to introduce you. Peter's career is in sustainable building and it spans all levels of the industry. And that's from the construction site to university as a professor, boardrooms, international negotiations. And he is the executive director of GBPN, Global Buildings Performance Network, which is an international network of experts. And we're dedicated to achieving the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. He's an associate professor at Monash University, Australia. Peter has over 20 years of experience in international advocacy, research, and education in sustainable building design, construction, evaluation, and policy. Previously, he has been the technical advisor and past coordinator of the United Nations Environment Programme's UNEP, Sustainable Buildings and Climate Initiative, where he developed and managed many key research projects and publications in the building sector. In these roles, Peter has worked very closely with across the board, public sector, civil society, private sector, to really assist the decarbonization of buildings and implement sustainable and resilient buildings. So welcome, Peter, for your introduction remarks.
Thank you so much, Mugure. Thank you all for coming. Thank you especially to our esteemed panelists today for coming to share your insights into progress and lessons learnt in decarbonising buildings in key African countries. As Mugure said, I'm the Executive Director of the Global Buildings Performance Network, and we are indeed an international network, a global network of local experts. And we work to try and decarbonise the building sector in the world's fastest urbanising regions, which is one of the reasons why we're very much focused on supporting African countries in their journey to decarbonise their building sector. GBPN has been involved in promoting and supporting commitments to climate action in the building sector since 2012. And in fact, was very much involved in setting the agenda at the Paris COP21 in 2015. And at that time, when we had the first Buildings Day at a COP at Paris, there were 136 countries that had mentioned buildings in their NDCs as areas for climate action. So that's around about 70% of the countries that had submitted NDCs at Paris. A decade later, there are 168 countries which mention buildings in their NDCs, either as mitigation, areas for mitigation or adaptation. So that's about 87% of countries. Out of that 168 countries, only about 19 countries are providing detailed building sector commitments and actionable with targets and implementable actions. So while we have a lot of commitments, what we can say there is that the building sector clearly is considered in the mainstream as an important sector for achieving national climate goals. And we should also reflect that in that decade, building sector emissions have continued to rise by about 1% per year, when the framework that we're trying to operate within is intended to decrease building sector emissions year on year, halving emissions by 2030 and being zero emissions by 2025. So what does that tell us about the efficacy of commitments and NDCs? What it tells us is that we have to turn commitments into achievements. We must do that if we're going to actually succeed in decarbonising the building sector, and especially if we're serious about achieving zero emissions by 2050, which is the time frame which is going to make a contribution to keeping global warming to 2 degrees or less, which is extremely important for our survival. It's exciting to be thinking about the challenge in Africa because most of the building stock that's going to stand in 2050 is yet to be constructed, which means that there's an amazing opportunity here to really build the future, starting from now in a net zero way. And that is an opportunity that exists only in a few countries on Earth right now. So supporting implementation of actions and turning commitments into achievements is really what GBPN is focused on. And to that end, we've also been involved in developing criteria for creating impactful and implementable NDC commitments. And there's a range of publications which set those out and a range of initiatives which have spun off from them. But, just to give you an overview of what really does make a difference here is, number one, having political commitment to change. Being led and setting agenda setting by government is extremely important. Number two is authentic stakeholder engagement, making sure that we're bringing everybody along with us. As Maguro was mentioning, if we want to go far, we go together. It's important that we have good stakeholder engagement processes and that everybody's voice is heard. We need to have specific targets for the sector. So measurable, reportable, verifiable targets, and we can measure progress towards. That's motivating, but it's also important for us to be able to see that we're on track for achieving change. We need ambitious goals. So we need to be looking at that zero emissions goal for 2050 and being Paris Agreement aligned. Of course, we need to start where the industry can start, but we don't want to lose sight of what we're all trying to achieve in terms of mitigating climate change and protecting the future for our children. Having a roadmap is also really important, and we've been involved in supporting roadmap development in Kenya and in other countries around the world. And I know that other organisations on the call have also been involved in that, setting up and starting to implement roadmaps, extremely important. Developing policies which enable market transformation, providing comprehensive action, so looking at the whole life cycle of emissions, for example, looking at the relationship between adaptation and mitigation, and looking for other impacts that are important that are achieved through better, more sustainable buildings, such as improvements in public health, better jobs, and sustainable economic growth. Having organisations or coordinating bodies which are given the responsibility and accountability for achieving targets is important. Aligning finance with the goals is important. Making sure that we're monitoring and measuring progress and reporting progress is important. And having this framework in place is essential for us to be able to develop the curriculum we need to actually educate the workforce and the professionals that are absolutely fundamental as pretty much the front line or first responders in the climate crisis when it comes to the building sector. So there are frameworks in place that can support the development of implementable and achievable commitments, and that's the role that GBPN is playing. So it's wonderful to be able to be here and support this webinar. It's really wonderful to be able to now listen to the insights and lessons learned from our panelists this evening. So with that, I'll hand it back to Maguro. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter, especially for really insightful remarks, reminding us of how important it is for the action to happen now on the continent and globally as well. I encourage you, if you have any questions along the way, please type them in the chat. Peter, I will come back to you during the moderated panel session with a couple of questions for you. And I'm happy to introduce our first panelist at this point, Mr. Danjuma Waniko. He will be contributing on the Nigeria scenario. Mr. Danjuma is the president of GBCN, which is the Green Building Council of Nigeria. And he's the founder of Carbon Scope Consulting, an emerging startup focused on carbon intelligence, ESG strategy, and green finance advisory. He has over 30 years of experience in sustainability, project management, and cost consultancy. He's also a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and a chartered environmentalist, among other professional accreditations. At GBCN, Mr. Danjuma is driving the development of Nigeria's first localized green building standards and the creation of a national carbon database, as well as the implementation of the NDC scorecard for sustainable buildings. And he'll be talking about this. He serves as a member of the African Union's ECOSOC Climate Change Working Group and the Global Commission on Healthy Indoor Air, contributing to international efforts to advance healthier, sustainable built environments. Beyond his consulting work, he has contributed to knowledge development through several notable thought pieces that have influenced sustainable practices within the construction industry. We're truly honored to have his experience. And Mr. Danjuma, over to you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mugure. Okay, I thought I'll run my presentation from here. Can I share my screen?
We actually have it lined up. Do you see it on the screen? It's on the screen right now.
Yes, I see it. Okay, I thought it would be faster for me to to run it myself. No worries. There's something up with my camera. I don't know. I've been having this issue, so forgive me for not showing my face. So I'll start very quickly with just an overview. So thank you so much for for having me here, Muguri and Team GBPN, and thank you, especially Peter. I remember the last time we chatted on the call, you mentioned you were in Australia, so I can't imagine what time it is. So thank you for staying up so late. And thank you for the good work that GBPN is doing. You set the scene wonderfully. I'll try and go as quickly as I can because I have quite a bit to say. I know that the title of the webinar is about operationalization of building sector actions, but I need to start by saying upfront that our journey in Nigeria is not yet a story of full operationalization. So if you look at it from the outside, you'll be right to be a bit unenthusiastic about where Africa's largest economy currently stands in terms of climate action in our buildings and cities. But that's kind of just the surface view. If we dig a bit deeper, and fortunately, I've had the privilege of doing this over the past year or so, what we'll find is that Nigeria is actually entering a very important and really exciting phase. One where the seeds have been sown, the groundwork has been laid, and where we're finally poised to see tangible action in our buildings and city sector. So what I'll be doing this morning, briefly, I hope, is not to paint a false picture or give the impression that we have already arrived, because we really haven't. What I hope to do is kind of show you how we are moving in a deliberate and in a structured way, from understanding the challenges to recognizing the gaps and what needs to be done, and then moving on to an intentional strategy to operationalize our building sector commitments in a way that is realistic, that is context aware, and that is capable of delivering real impact. So if you can change the slide now, I think we can move on. So first of all, we've already set the scene. Mugure and Peter said it, but I always say there's value in repetition for learning. So let me start by repeating or reiterating why this conversation matters so much, especially for us here in Nigeria. We're already a huge country, about 240 million of us, potentially 400 million by 2050, and we're still growing very quickly. Our urban population is growing by about 4% a year. By 2050, about over 70% of us will be living in cities by current projections. That's up from about 55% today. So in practical, real terms, okay, that means that we'll be adding tens of millions of people to our cities within just one generation. And as we've heard, most of the buildings that these people will live in and will work in, they haven't been built yet. At the same time, for us and for much of Africa, climate impacts, they are no longer theoretical. It's no longer something that is far off, something that we say is coming. If we don't do ABC, it's already there. It's no longer a what if. And we see that all around our country, and heat waves, desertification, and then we can't forget the annual rite of passage, flooding. There's virtually no part of Nigeria that is spared. We have hundreds of thousands of people displaced each year. We have roads cut off. We have farms wiped out. We have communities destroyed. And then all this is happening alongside our rapid, unplanned urban sprawl. People being pushed into wetlands, into floodplains, and into steep slopes, because those are the only places they can afford to build and to live. And then layered over that is our vulnerability. One study says that Nigeria comes 157th out of 187 countries ranked globally. That is disappointingly near the bottom. That means that our cities are highly exposed. They are poorly prepared for the climate realities we are facing. Just case in point, depending on which data we choose to use, anywhere from half to up to 2/3 of our urban population lives in inadequate housing, often in slums, informal settlements with no basic services, virtually no protection from climate hazards. And these are the people that are least able to cope with extreme weather events, things like floods and extreme heat. They have no buffers, they have no savings, they have no ACs, they have nowhere to go when disaster strikes. And then on top of that, a lot of and thens, we have the emissions gap report that was just published last week. That tells us that the 1.5 degrees that we were hoping for, that it may no longer be possible. That on current trends, we're on track for about 2.5 to 2.8 degrees centigrade warming by the end of the century. So remember that all this stuff, all these impacts we are struggling with, that we're talking about, it's happening and we're just at 1.1, 1.2 degrees centigrade. So imagine what 2.5 degrees would look like. So for us in Nigeria, and I think the wider Africa, the question of buildings and cities, as Mugure mentioned, is not just a mitigation question. It's actually a survival agenda. It's about exposure, vulnerability, and resilience. And that is for a huge swath of our population. So for me, this puts us as kind of a crossroads. No, back, I'm not done yet. So on the one hand, we can continue with BAU, building sprawling, inefficient, and climate-exposed cities, or we can do something different. We can build homes, communities, public buildings that are efficient, that are climate resilient, and healthier to live in. Cities that work for both people and planet. And then as icing on the cake, as Mugure also touched on, we can leverage the built environment's cross-cutting impacts to tackle our developmental challenges. If we design and build well, if we are strategic and intentional in the way we construct our buildings and cities, that same money that we use to construct can also reduce energy bills. It can improve health and comfort. It can reduce flood risk. It will create masses of jobs in construction, and it can grow our manufacturing base. So next slide, please. So when we take all that together, the obvious question becomes, why aren't we acting? We're aware of the problems, the challenges, and even the potential. Okay, why aren't we responding? What is holding us back? And in Nigeria, for us here, the simple, honest answer is we simply don't have the systems, the tools, or the institutional architecture to translate our ambition into real action in our buildings and cities. First of all, of course, our earlier NDCs, our older NDCs, barely included buildings, mentioned in passing, kind of like an also ran. So the sector has never really been treated as a core climate priority. And even today, we still don't have a dedicated plan that spells out what needs to happen. The second thing is, yes, we do have policies. We have an energy efficiency code. We have our Climate Change Act. We have NDCs. We have our LT-LEDs. So many, a raft of policies. But what most of these lack are real implementation or delivery levers. Third, which I believe is probably common across the world, is institutions operating in silos. In Nigeria, we have housing in one ministry, power is somewhere else, environment is somewhere else again. So there is a tendency for things to fall through the cracks. There is a potential for duplication. We have contexts where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And then again, we don't have a proper system for collecting data or measuring what's happening in the sector. No baselines for operational or embodied carbon, for example, no real MRV for buildings. So without this, how do we measure progress? How do we show results? How do we mobilize investment? And then money, of course, and capacity. Only a tiny share. We're already getting much less than the actual amount of climate funding we need. But even with that tiny amount, a tinier share is allocated to buildings and cities. And then again, the states, the ones in Nigeria who actually approve and shape our built environment, they often don't have the technical capacity to enforce codes or to integrate climate resilience into their planning. So let me wrap up by saying that the news is not all bad. Our NDC 3.0 goes much further than anything we've had before. It has real specific building-related measures. But those commitments, they still don't come with delivery systems we need. There is no real MRV, roles are not quite clear, and there is no unified national pathway. So at the end of the day, Nigeria, we have ambition, but we don't yet have the delivery architecture to match it. Next slide, please. So having painted this gloomy picture, this less than encouraging backdrop, let me switch gears a bit by saying that all is not lost. Taking what I call a glass half full perspective, I'm glad to say that at least we're not starting from scratch. We're not starting from zero. Okay, we already have the major building blocks in place. We have a formal net zero commitment, 2060, a bit later than we wish, but good enough. We have legal mandate of the Climate Change Act. We have a more ambitious NDC 3.0, as I mentioned, and we have a raft of enabling policies and frameworks. And then layering over this, building on this, I think the NDC scorecard for sustainable buildings project, I don't want to talk too much about that yet. That's a subject for an entire webinar. Suffice to say that over 18 months, we ran a series of workshops, consultations, surveys. We had dozens of conversations across the entire stakeholder ecosystem. So this, I believe, has shifted the landscape. What do I mean by that? Right now, it has given us a much clearer understanding of the real gaps. Okay, one of the most important gains from my perspective of the scorecard project is more clarity. It has given us a more grounded Nigeria-specific view of what is missing. Not theoretical gaps, not something that you cook up in a back room somewhere, but real gaps based in our context. Things like where our policies stop, where enforcement fails, where subnational capacity fails down or breaks down, where we have implementation barriers and bottlenecks. Secondly, we have wider and deeper engagement across the ecosystem. Peter touched on this. The level of engagement has shifted cautiously but noticeably from where we were 18 months ago. Through the scorecard, and the action plan that we developed from that process. We convened over 250 stakeholders from more than 150 organizations across the country. We canvassed, I think, about 18 of our 37 subnational units. We had national ministries, subnational agencies, professional bodies, academia, civil society, private sector in the room. So we had people who normally sit in silos. They were now in the same room interrogating the same issues. The third shift that we're seeing now is growing alignment on the need to act on what to do, on how to begin. Yeah, we've seen a shift in tone emerge in the course of the scorecard project. There's far less debate about whether buildings matter and far more constructive discussion about how we need to move forward, the things we need to do. Things like strengthening codes, building capacity, improving enforcement, integrating resilience, and of course, the elephant in the room, more financing for climate-aligned buildings. The fourth thing is strengthening capacity across the ecosystem. We have deepening of the human capacity through courses, increase the interest in certifications, and increase interest and enrollment in certification and educational courses, professional bodies and universities embedding sustainability into their programs. So I'm told I have 1 minute left. So, and next slide, please. On top of that, we are also seeing encouragingly early signals of subnational action. That's where the action actually takes place in Nigeria. We have early planning and building reforms taking place. In Lagos, we have a new building code that's about to be launched that integrates energy efficiency and water efficiency. In Abuja also, we have the Development Control Department integrating energy efficiency into their building regulation manual. We have climate policy activity. We have new climate change offices popping up across the country. We have states that are experimenting with creating unified metropolitan authorities. And last but not least, we have one of the strongest signals is the willingness to engage. During our scorecard workshops, we saw great engagement from the subnationals, strong participation, sincere and honest reflection about where they stand and what climate change means for their cities and what steps they need or can take to address these challenges. So next slide, please. So looking ahead, with all this foundational work in place, the question now becomes, how do we build on all this? How do we move from these signals, these early foundations, to something that is more coordinated, more intentional, and capable of driving real change in our buildings and cities? So for me, the logical next step is, of course, a national decarbonization and resilience roadmap, and something that tells us what to do, who needs to do it, how we'll do it, when we'll do it, and what it will take. And I'm excited to announce that GBCN will be launching just such a project next year, coming at the right moment. Of course, we've just submitted our NDC in September. This gives very much clearer signals on buildings, from updating our national building code to developing a national climate resilience and green building policy, and that commitment is time-bound. The policy is 2030. Implementation is tied to 2035. So this gives us a strong national anchor, but it still doesn't tell us how to deliver. And that's where the roadmap comes in. It allows us to pull together everything we've done over the past 18 months, the scorecard insights, the workshops, our action plan, and turn it into one clear NDC-aligned direction of travel. So if we get this right, it can become the architecture that connects our national ambition, our subnational realities, and our sector priorities in a coherent, practical, and sequenced pathway for delivering our climate commitments. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up very quickly, Nigeria, we're at a pivotal moment. We're under real pressure, urbanization, vulnerabilities, climate impacts and realities all around us. But we are also at a point where we have real momentum, clearer sense of where we need to go and what needs to be done. And with the forthcoming roadmap, anchored in our NDC 3.0, we finally have a chance to turn this momentum into a practical pathway for delivery. And if we can get this right, the built environment in Nigeria, very likely it will stop being a problem to manage, and it will become a driver of opportunity for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danjuma. And I think there are a lot of things to reflect from your presentation. One, the clarity where you presented why, from a people-centered approach, why it's really important for us to act now. And then the very clear articulation of the challenges, which in the Q&A session will be great to hear from other panelists as well, whether we have similar challenges across the continent. And then, of course, how you have ended with such a good note in terms of how there is progress and it's moving forward, and SGBCN, the work that you're doing. And I want to encourage the listeners to please also visit the GBCN website to see some of the other work they're doing in addition to what Danjuma has also mentioned. I want to move to the next speaker. We're moving from West Africa to the South. We're moving to South Africa, and our next speaker will be presenting the South Africa scenario. We have Ms. Faith from SANEDI. SANEDI is the South Africa National Energy Development Institute. Faith is a driving force behind some of the most significant energy efficiency initiatives in Africa, and she possesses a wealth of experience in fostering sustainable energy practices. She's the general manager for energy efficiency in SANEDI, and she oversees energy efficiency and the demand side management division. She's an executive with over 20 years of experience in the energy and industrial resource sectors, spanning generation, transmission, distribution, renewable energy, and climate change mitigation. She's a UNIDO certified international energy management expert and a RENAC certified renewable energy project developer. Faith has a proven track record of delivering innovative and impactful energy and climate change projects across 10 countries. She's passionate about advancing the ESG and climate change agenda in the energy sector and beyond. She currently serves as a member of the SABS Advisory Forum, which was established in accordance with Section 14 of the Standards Act to provide strategic advice to the SABS board. Faith, we are very much looking forward to your presentation. I welcome you, and please do take us through South Africa.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction. So South Africa, in a nutshell, I just had Mr. Waniko just telling us about maybe the integration and the work that happens in silos. So in South Africa, first and foremost, we have too much going on. So maybe that's a problem too. And we do have interdepartmental or interministerial collaborations. For example, if you look at the Paris Agreement, which we're a signatory of as well, the custodian of it is the Department of Forestries and Environment. But if you think about energy, and the Department of Energy and Electricity feels strongly that it should sit with them because energy is a proxy for decarbonization, especially in a country like South Africa, where 96% of people have access to electricity, but we are a fossil fuel-based economy. So there's a lot happening, and yes, there's a lot of collaboration between departments, between private organizations as well. Some have tried to capture here, but the story would be long. So by way of introduction, SANEDI is an arm, it's an implementation arm of the department. We are a standalone entity. You could call us an SOE, and we have our own legislative mandate that speaks to addressing energy challenges in South Africa. Not just looking at energy challenges, but looking at greenhouse gas emissions, looking at climate change, and of course, dealing with the socio-economic aspects of it as well. Next slide, please. So I tried to structure my presentation in such a way that is going to bring out some of the key aspects that I want to share with you. And these key aspects are across this key operationalization mechanisms. So the first part, we're going to look at mandatory building codes because that's what's popular and it enjoyed a great uptake and implementation. And then we're going to look at the regulatory framework and the financial frameworks. One of the things I'm excited about is one of the slides that I'm going to share with you on the financial frameworks, because for a very long time, we needed, and I drove and I supported an initiative to have a financial framework that speaks to green finance, the terms and conditions to align, particularly for African countries. I'm excited that we have a framework that finally does just that. In terms of policy instruments and regulatory framework in South Africa, it's not a problem. We have a lot, some of them not as well as implemented as they could be, and some of them just not being seen through properly. However, at SANEDI, we do assist, especially in the energy efficiency and demand side management. One of our roles is to help the department implement this policy. We advocate for the policies, and of course, we provide data for new policies, and of course, the policies that exist that can just be reviewed. And then the second part is going to be the energy efficiency solution, because for us, this is the cheapest solution, right? It's a low-hanging fruit. We cannot build another power station. As a matter of fact, it's my strong belief that we shouldn't build another power plant up until we've exhausted all the options that lie in energy efficiency. And then, of course, awareness, capacity building, and building expertise in South Africa. Next slide, please. So given those four key aspects, one of the key things, and maybe as a starting point, is to provide some global context of why South Africa also need to straighten up, to align, and where we are in terms of our NDCs as well. So if you think about our CO2 emissions, we have around 1/3. So it's a lot. I did mention that we're a fossil fuel-based economy, and it's been very topical because the global West says you must move away from fossil fuel, particularly coal. But we have a lot of coal in South Africa, and I think we still have another 200-300 years of coal, and it also happens to be the cheapest primary energy source for us to generate electricity. So rather, while we are doing that, let's focus also on the technologies to reduce the coal emissions. And then, of course, we have a buildings sector that is so large and contributes around 23%. It depends on how you look at this. If you consider operational material and construction, it can even go considerably higher as well. But also in terms of the buildings themselves, we know globally, they contribute 18% of electricity demand. And of course, 80%, as I said, of our electricity, which is consumed in these buildings, is of course from fossil fuel, particularly coal, in some degrees, a little bit of natural gas, which is also a fossil fuel. The biggest issue, though, is that as much as we've set our NDC, the original target, and then revised it in 2021, we are still not where we need to be. And according to experts, if we stick with the current NDC, we will not be able to meet net zero target. So it's something that I think for me, that's the first issue as I break down these approaches. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to bring it closer to home, in terms of the specifically commercial buildings sector, in terms of consumption, I've already given you the consumption, but if you look at a whopping 25%, it's just cooling and heating. so HVAC. And I think maybe you don't know this, but in South Africa, we don't have a regulation or a standard that says we must insulate our buildings. So South African buildings are not insulated, unlike in Europe and Australia and other countries. So you can imagine the losses just from HVAC alone. We heat it up, we sit a few minutes and we have to reheat. It is ridiculous. So we have to also do something about that. And then, of course, lighting. You might think, given that we have maps for lighting, it's much lower, but the consumption for lighting is still very high. And that 20 to 30% is across the economic sectors, including the municipalities, where if you're driving in some of our freeways, please don't be shocked to see some of the orange light because they are yet to transition to LEDs. Despite us having standards for more than 10 years now that specifically speak to LEDs. The other big problem with this local stats is that we don't know quite for sure how many buildings that maybe qualify to be addressed by the regulatory frameworks that we have. For example, EPC, which I'm going to speak about later on, because it can only address buildings that are minimum 1,000 square meters and above. And in South Africa, we can only estimate. And for now, we're estimating between 250,000 to 350,000 qualifying buildings. So more data is needed in that regard. So you can imagine how difficult it's been to try and implement a regulation when we don't have that fundamental data. And then lastly, it's just to also make sure that once we understand that and they use the energy usage or the energy consumption, then we can drill down and of course translate that into our greenhouse gas emissions target. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's wrong with my slide. They seem to take a while. But in terms of other targets that speak specifically to energy efficiency, the nice thing about this is that it's been broken down into sectors. So we've got the economy-wide target of 29%, which we think is fair by 2030. But then we also have the public and commercial sectors there, which are highlighted. So public and commercial sectors is 37%. It's one of the larger ones. But public buildings are even bigger because for a very long time, they've been neglected. And where we have implemented initiatives and actions and they comply with certain regulations and policies, it's very slow. So something had to be done. And unfortunately, without the baseline, we are not able to track how far the building sector is in terms of emissions in South Africa. But given my experience and my interaction with the public entities in South Africa, we do realize that we are a long way from achieving that 50%. So we have to be all hand on deck. And I think knowing where we are in terms of the baseline will definitely go a long way in trying to assist so that we can have evidence-based data to drive these initiatives and commitments. Next slide, please. Yes, so the other part of the regulation I wanted to speak about, particularly because it's topical right now, it's also fairly new. This is our EPC or Energy Performance Certificate regulation. In an ideal world, it's perfect in every sense, but it was promulgated in 2020 already with teething issues. We went back, revised the compliance deadline, and then we had a regulation amendment to specifically speak to the skills that will be introduced as part of this. The challenge, and I suppose in my experience in other African countries as well, is that for us, it's not just about an energy solution or a decarbonization solution. It's like Vera said, it's about taking everyone with us. So we have to introduce a new set of skills. In this case, it's EPC practitioners, which also we have to follow all the processes of making sure that it's accredited with the right authorities, and then what we call EPC registered professionals. These are the people who come with experience, who will be doing the work, but also independently issuing the EPCs. So SANEDI sits with the register. It's a self-registration for building owners, but you also have to construct your own EPC registered professional to issue the EPC, which is the final certificate that we need to comply. So with this one, it's for buildings that are 1,000 square meters and above, but you also have to make sure that you register your building And then you comply by displaying it in your building, in a foyer or visible area of your building, because these are typically public buildings, schools, hospitals, shopping centers, libraries, that sort of thing. And if you think of 1,000 square meters, that includes a whole lot of buildings. And like I said, they are significant consumers of electricity and contributors towards emissions as well. So it's so topical right now because we are already counting down the compliance deadline, which is the 7th of December 2025. And I can tell you that right now we have just over 8,000 registered buildings on our database. We have a lot more in the pipeline. They lack data. In other cases, the data is just not reliable and accurate. So that is also a big problem. On the other side, in terms of the actual EPCs, because you get an EPC after registering your buildings, we only have just under 5,000 EPCs issued. So the idea was that given that we don't have a baseline data, this data, the first 5 years, will go on to inform a baseline. But given that very few buildings have complied, we sit with a challenge. And I guess now the department will have to make a call and an announcement based on where to go to next. But generally, every 5 years, you need to get a new EPC. Next. And for now, because I mentioned that the first 5 years was just for the baseline, that means we are yet to introduce minimum energy performance for building. So we're not even looking at that in this past 5 years. The first step was just to register and then get your EPC. And then the next step will be to look at the movements between the ratings A to G. So some of the good things that are happening in South Africa over and above our regulatory framework is the partnerships that are happening, private, government, international funders. There's partnerships happening everywhere. And of course, we finally found a voice to say, this will not work for us, this will work for us. And we've boldly stated that if the terms and conditions do not suit our actual challenge, then it's not worth signing up and it's not worth collaborating with that particular entity. So if you look at private, and I'm going to take it, the other way around. If you look at private sector engagement, this is happening all around. We have sectoral working groups, and this is fantastic because for the first time we're talking in one voice, and whatever it is that we want is amplified. So that's positive. And if you look at capacity buildings, I will tell you when I worked on the UNIDO project in 2011, I had just left Eskom, which is the national electricity provider. We didn't have a lot of local experts in South Africa. However, we have a lot more that are also being taken to assist other countries, not just in Africa, but other parts of the world too. So it's something that we continue to work on, but we're very, very much proud because in South Africa, as you might know, unemployment is a huge issue. So we need to make sure that our workforce is number one, stable, but also we keep making sure that our youth gains employment as well. And then lastly, the financial frameworks. So finally, because of the collaborative nature of the different sectors, especially the financial sectors, the big four banks, the investment firms, and JSE, we've been able to come up with what we call the Sustainable Finance Initiative for Buildings Taxonomy entry. And this is something that's going to change the landscape of investment, particularly for green buildings, green technology, green funding in South Africa as well. Next, please. So just to highlight some of the positive of that taxonomy, and it's a fairly new document, it's a new concept, but already we're seeing some positives about how it's happening. People are obviously speaking in one voice. It was launched officially in April 2022. However, we're not rushing to firm up anything because for now it is just merely created to define which economic activities, which set of assets, which kind of projects that can be deemed or classified as environmentally friendly or green. And then we also make sure that the ongoing conversation with these different working groups continue, because then we provide clarity, transparency. And then when it comes to progress, we'll also have an open discussion around those things. And of course, we'll devise a way forward as well. For now, this is very much voluntary, but as we firm it up and the framework is better implemented, we want to make sure that it moves towards being a mandatory regulatory aspect. And of course, we look to some financial authorities to assist with compliance of that. The other aspect is that it promotes clarity, but it also reduces the risk. I think the biggest aspect when it comes to Africa and green financing has been the risk. Everybody just highlights the risk before they can speak to us, before they can fully understand what we are trying to achieve. They're already highlighting the risk. So when we know our risks and we mitigate those risks first, we will not wait for anybody else to tell us about a risk and how we can mitigate them, because we'll, number one, understand them and then make sure that we come up with ways and mitigating factors for those risks as well. And then lastly, we want to make sure that this prioritizes the national commitments. And of course, not just the NDC, but we also want to align with all the international standards, whether it's going to be the task force for climate and financial disclosures, or TCFD, ISSB, etc. We want to also make sure that on an ongoing basis, it aligns with either one, so that should organizations, project implementers choose to align their ESG with any of these standards, then they are still eligible to apply and get assistance from the green finance taxonomy. Next, as I conclude. Yes, so I know it's a bit of a downer because I've highlighted some key positives, but as I close, I also wanted to reiterate some challenges, maybe more so for me, but also to let other African countries know that we don't have it all figured out. We're not perfect. And that necessitate this collaboration and the talks and moving forward, as Mugure said. So we still need to deal with enforcement and compliance. That can get better, definitely, even in the building sector, but that also run across other policy instruments and regulations. Data gap for us, that is a big deal. Even as we speak, that means we need to track and make sure that we know where we are in terms of performance and progress, but without accurate data, that remains a challenge. And then we need to also go back and raise our ambition. As I've said earlier, our ambition is rated insufficient because we will not be able to meet the global target of 1.5-degree goal should we continue on this current trajectory. So we have to go back to the drawing board. But it's my firm belief that once we have substantial data and we have the baseline, we can make a better decision and then, of course, create a pathway for it. And then last but not least is just the integrated planning. I did say that in South Africa, the problem is that everybody's doing something and there's a lot going on. And I must admit that the current regime is very much supportive. So there is also political will, meaning there's money and projects happening all over the place. But I think at some point we need to sit back and consolidate all of that, but also consolidate our methodologies, consolidate our wins, so that when we report, we have a collective and aligned reporting as well. Overall, for us, I think we have a lot of volunteer in terms of the ratings, the standards, all of that we covered. But yes, we must make sure, as Peter said, that our ambitions and our targets are, number one, implementable and also achievable. Because I think at this point, if you don't know, without data, you don't know what you don't know, right? And at this point, one person will tell you that with confidence we can get there. But in terms of evidence, we still need to provide that. So I think that's the big challenge that South Africa is here to deal with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Faith. I think that was such a comprehensive view of your context. And there's so many things I've picked that are similar to what Danjuma has said around some work happening in silos, opportunities to work closer together, but also really good opportunities, how the sector has come together, what Saned is doing around the EPCs, and then a common trend again also around unemployment and creating jobs for young African people in this sector. So we'll come back to that. Thank you so much for that. And of particular interest as well is the green finance taxonomy. So it would be great to hear more about that even post of this session. I'd like to introduce the next speaker. And I have to apologize for any background noise. We are trying to meet the building stock of the 70% building stock. So that's the construction happening in the background. So my next speaker is from Kenya. Mr. Kennedy Matheka. I'm happy to introduce him. He will take us through what's happening in Kenya. And he's currently working at the Ministry of Lands, Public Housing, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development in Kenya, where he holds the position of Deputy Director for Building Safety and Climate Resilience. Additionally, he acts as the National Coordinator for issues pertaining to buildings and climate. And he also serves as the Senior Country Representative at the ICBC, which is the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate, where Kenya is currently the Global Vice Chair. Welcome. I know you came from Belem a few hours ago. We thank you for being part of this conversation. He's a professional in the built environment with more than 15 years of experience in public sector, and he has focused on the design and implementation of public projects in the safe infrastructure sector, as well as engaging in research and development. He has held positions in various national and international projects and programs, and we're very privileged to have you here, Kennedy. Welcome.
Thank you, Mugure. I hope you can hear me. Okay, thank you very much. I want to be a bit brief to discuss on Kenya's position in relations to our building and construction and the nationally determined contributions. As I believe every one of you is aware that countries under the Paris Agreement are meant to develop and even implement nationally determined contributions based on their methodology and the best they can do to deliver climate actions within their own economies. And therefore, for us in the construction sector in Kenya, within the NDC documents that have been submitted, first version being the intended, the second one being the one that is in operation running from the year 2020 to 2030, and the third version, which is anticipated to run between the year 2031 to 2035, which is the NDC version 3.0. It is within that framework that as a country and as a sector, we are developing a decarbonization roadmap for the building and construction sector, borrowing heavily from the NDC documents. And therefore, that is what I would like to discuss in brief. Next slide, please. And we are doing this process together with our partners, GBPN, which has come handy to really support the country and even the ministry to ensure that we develop that in an integrated, inclusive, and a whole government approach, together with our partners led by Architectural Association of Kenya and a number of partners that are even represented here today. So in the process of us developing the roadmap itself, it has also come handy together with other initiatives that we have made as a country and even as a sector. And particular of interest is that during the COP26 at Glasgow, then we had several initiatives that were being launched. And in 2023, Kenya did join the Buildings Breakthrough. Buildings Breakthrough is one of the many breakthroughs that was agreed on during that COP. And we believed as a country that the Buildings Breakthrough was relevant and significant for us as a sector. And therefore, to date, the Buildings Breakthrough champions the agenda of near net zero buildings by the year 2030. And that itself is a commitment aligned to our NDC commitment, which talks about carbon reductions in our sector. And therefore, as a country, we are one of the 30 states countries that are members of the Buildings Breakthrough. And not just that we are members, but we are also proactive members of one of the 5 international priority areas, and particularly on demand and creation, where we are co-leading on issues around policy development within the Buildings Breakthrough. That initiative itself is a plus, not just for us, but we look at it as we co-lead in other areas. that we build the momentum for us in African, within the African, Pan-African context, to see how best we should join hands, learn from our colleagues, especially from the global north, to see how then best we can move forward our buildings agenda. So I would start off by calling our colleagues in South Africa and our colleagues from Nigeria to push and ensure that the governments represents the interests of the organizations, and see how best you can join the two countries and even more other countries to join the buildings breakthrough. So as we build up the momentum at a global scale, then we'll urge our Pan-African team to also find it fit to be part of the Buildings Breakthrough Initiative. We're also serving at the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate. This is purely governmental initiatives where we are serving together with our colleague in France and Brazil. And this is where now governments are taking the early lead in this conversation, championing the initiatives, all initiatives in the Buildings Breakthrough and even the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And therefore, that is also another initiative that we also wish to see us join and move together so that we can easily push our agenda at a global level, tap the opportunities that are available at that level, and see how best then we can support our state and non-state actors within the building and construction sector to move forward. But more importantly, as we align Kenya to these initiatives and even quite a number of others, because we are members of Global ABC, we're also members of Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, and even quite a number of other international organizations, then that positions us to realign our policy, to realign our markets, to realign our opportunities in different ways for our people. And therefore, it creates an opportunity to access global coordination, technical assistance, and even financing tools. And this is not just what we look for, because as Vice Chair, we also wish well to have Nigeria be onboarded, to have South Africa be onboarded, so that we grow the numbers for easy access of the opportunities that I'm just talking about, including a way of, as an African nation, or rather as a team, demonstrate how global ambitions can be localized within our own climate setups. And therefore, it's an important component for all of us to see that as we have presence as Kenya, then we also carry along our neighbors, our key players, and our Pan-African team. And our positioning as well also drives our regional leadership, not just in the region, but even at an African context. But we also, as I said, wish to have each and every one of us move forward with us, so that all the benefits that arise in the Buildings Breakthrough, arise in the Intergovernmental Council, then are brought home for our continent to even, tap more opportunities rather, so that our Pan-African continent could also tap more opportunities that are rising from our joining of the Intergovernmental Council and even being members of the breakthroughs. Next slide, please. So as we talk about that kind of a conversation, we had, in the process of developing the roadmap, we had an opportunity of unbundling a lot of conversation around the NDC for Kenya, and particular interest around building and construction sector. And within the technical adaptation report that comes together with the NDC package, it is established that our total emissions within the year 2021 is 22.4 million tons of carbon equivalent. And that itself, being a global figure, then gives us an imperative to then indicate that our building and construction sector here in Kenya contribute significantly to these numbers. And we are also very keen to ensure that we realize the global target of 32% of that number as a global figure. But then we also cognizant as a sector of the rapid urbanization that we are facing as we grow our cities, as we grow our population. And therefore, that has an impact in terms of future emission trajectories that we are looking into, especially as we near 2030, 2040, and 2063 urban agenda. And therefore, for us as a sector, we are looking at how then can we address those operational and embodied emissions issues put together. And that is why the need to develop a roadmap so that we could get the baselines, we can get our situations, then could help us map how to deal with the operation and embodied carbons moving together. And this is exactly what we are talking about. And therefore, as we position ourselves as a sector, we are quite aligned to the global and national target that we have, which for Kenya is to reduce the target from the business as usual to 32%. And that is what we committed ourselves and shared to UNFCCC. And that is what we are working on to see that as we report, next slide, as we report as a sector, then we align to the global targets. And therefore, as we developed this roadmap, there are key findings, key scenarios that we have established as we move forward, that we have a current sector emissions for the building and construction being at 13%, another 13 million ton carbon dioxide equivalent. This is slightly lower than the global figure, but we contribute to the rationale and the number that we have as a sector. But then we have a potential based on the decarbonization interventions that we're looking into our sector to reduce that number from 13 to 8.8 by the year 2030. And therefore, this is a good initiative of up to 67 potential reduction. But then this can actually be achieved by having several initiatives put together. And a key component in this is an integrated approach on how we look at our policy actions, how we look at market transformation, how then we look about enhanced collaboration and partnership. And therefore, quantifying mitigation pathways provide a pathway for us as a sector to track and be able to even report the various NDC commitments that we put forward. Next slide, please. And therefore, for us, then I also want us to discuss why we felt necessary to develop a roadmap based on the NDC document that we had. And we will be in a position to will be able to discuss this in brief, and that one of the methodology and the reason why we developed the roadmap is to provide a clear evidence-based pathway for us as a sector, and even ensure that our transition trajectory is globally aligned, credible, and even locally achievable. Those are some of the things that we looked into, but also ensure that we provide a baseline that is going to make it easier for us to move forward and even able to provide the necessary support to the NDC updates that may be required. Next slide, please. So as we handled the issue of development of the roadmap, we were very keen to develop the roadmap under the GBPN collaborative and interactive approach based on five different approaches, particularly on the issues of evidence and data-driven issues of co-creation and inclusivity, and ensure then that we align ourselves to the best global practice, but also ensure that we ground our methodology and data and necessary information from our industry partners, supply chain, and even every stakeholder that is involved. Next slide, please. And therefore, as we developed as we developed the roadmap, we are very keen to co-create this with various technical working groups, 6 of them that have been listed. Each of them has some level of autonomy to ensure that whatever is required for them to develop and propose strategic areas of interventions then could be handled at that level, and further ensure that whatever is required for us in the 6 technical working formations then would be done in a manner that guides the whole approach. So there are several conversations in each of those technical working groups. There is a lot that each of them have established, and there's a report that we always urge each and every one of you to look into and see how best then each of the sub-technical working group has looked into. There are different formations, different participation, and we always urge each and every one of you to also cross-reference from our colleagues what they have done. If you look at the justice, equity, diversity, and even inclusive principles that we have applied, we have ensured that the policy instruments remain affordable and inclusive for all of us, and further ensure that we have proper monitoring systems based on our own methodology and even systems relating to data, and even not just relying heavily on the external models that we have. Next slide, please. In it, as a roadmap, we are looking into not just 3, but quite a number of packages that the roadmap will address: issues around public procurement, issues around finance, issues relating to our building code updates, issues around capacity building, and issues around compliance to the various provisions that have been made possible in the roadmap. Next slide, please. As I talked about this in terms of alignment or with our NDC, there is a clear pathway in terms of how our roadmap talks or speaks to the NDC document, but more importantly is to provide an annual tracking indication for the reporting and even ensure that we directly link our sector baselines to the national reporting framework that is already provided for under the MRV guideline reporting of 2022. Next slide, please. So we are very keen to ensure that the next updates that we have for the country under NDCs, then our roadmap is well aligned. And that's why our roadmap spans up to the year 2040. And the NDC document being a document of a 5-year cycle, then creates and gives us an opportunity to ensure that the next updates that are required for various NDCs, including the one that we project to start the year 2031 to 2035, any updates that are coming for the purpose of the NDC then will be fully aligned with the right documentation for within our own sector. And therefore, we want to use our roadmap as a baseline document to advise government in terms of how then we can submit our revisions for the NDC. Next slide, please. So as I talked about this, it's not just for us as a country, but how best can we look at the model that works for all of us, especially those of us from the global south, more importantly for those of us who come from Africa, and seeing how best we can develop a roadmap that we can support our own colleagues from within our own region to develop their own roadmaps and to be able to project the same kind of numbers at a local level in the best way possible. Next slide, please. And therefore, as I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, we are very keen to see that we deliver a roadmap or we implement a roadmap that aligns with the national reduction targets. We also ensure that we remain inclusive and participatory as much as possible, ensure our capacity as a sector, and even position not just Kenya, but even all of us as global leaders in climate responsive buildings. Next slide, please. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And there is a lot that our process has taken us through, but we believe when we move together, then we are able to move towards a sustainable and a low carbon future for all of us, not just in Kenya, but within Africa. Thank you. Back to Mugure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kennedy. I really appreciate that insightful look into the process of the roadmap and how government has led a big group of stakeholders towards the country commitment, towards meeting the country commitments. There are no questions in the Q&A, so allow me to direct a question to each panelist. And I'd ask the people participating, please stay with us, and we may run about 10 minutes past the end time, but please stay with us to hear the wonderful voices who are on this call today. So Faith, maybe I'll just start off with you. And I think one of the EPCs are really a flagship compliance instrument. And I think it would be great to hear about your early insights as to how the EPCs are influencing investment decisions, retrofits, and market confidence. So over to you, Faith.
Yeah, absolutely. So EPCs have been a game changer for buildings because I think up until then, we didn't have a specific regulation that spoke to buildings specifically in South Africa. So for the first time, we have something. We've already had standards and other initiative, and of course, the National Energy Efficiency Strategy with a commitment specifically for the building sector. So when this happened, it kind of fast-tracked actions and activities for most people, because When I workshop the EPC, the first opening is not just about compliance, and I'm a big advocate of making sure that whether it's standard or any regulatory framework, policy, regulation, is not a tool that overburdens you, because it's received, there's this negative connotation around regulation. But EPC is actually very different, because yes, you have to comply in terms of receiving the EPC, and then ultimately, in the near future, you also have to make sure that you report your energy savings. But it's a strategic tool to also help you with your energy efficiency endeavors as well. It's also helpful in terms of the investment, as you were alluding to. I think what it did, and this is just my observation 5 years later, there's been a switch and a change where there was this lax attitude around energy efficiency. So most organizations would have a standalone energy efficiency strategy that's set on the side, especially in the building sector. Industry was slightly different. In the building sector, they still had standalone energy efficiency strategies. So what this did is it had forced building owners to prioritize energy efficiency, to incorporate energy efficiency as their main strategy. And also, if you do the stakeholder mapping for buildings, key there is also the facilities managers in South Africa. So even the facility managers have also had to acknowledge, so much so that for the first time in South Africa, we're not just dealing with building owners as a result of the EPC, we're dealing with the architects, the Association of Architects, the building owners, the public entities as well, Department of Public Works. We are also dealing with the Association for Property Valuers as well in South Africa. So it has done something that I think we've always wanted to do, and actually speak to specific stakeholders that no other policy has had the ability to do before. Because now everybody said, wait a minute, what happens to the price of the property? If you're saying these are the benefits, surely something must shift. Surely something must change as well. So it has gone full circle in terms of the things that I was still hoping SNA would implement to obviously tie up the greening of our buildings. So I think EPC has been able to do that for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Faith. And as we proceed on this Q&A session, can I just request all the panelists to turn on their cameras just for this particular part of the session? I think, Danjuma, I'll come over to you. And you talked about 250 stakeholders that you brought together as you were doing the NDC scorecard action plan, I believe. It would be great to find out from the multi-stakeholder process what was learned in terms of what's most practical on the ground to really unlock real progress in the commitments and in what GBCN is trying to do. Is it regulation? Is it finance? Is it capacity building or market incentives? And you mentioned some of these things in your presentation about things that need to be addressed. But what do you feel is the most practical lever that can really start moving things on the ground?
Okay. Thank you once again. I think speaking to the process you mentioned, like it was quite a bit of a long process, 250 stakeholders over 18 months, multiple organizations. And let me speak just first of all about the action plan, which we developed, the outcome document, because that will frame what I'm going to say. It contains 8 strategic objectives. So it's at the end of the day, we came up with 8 things that we felt we needed to do. I'm growing a bit older, so I developed a mnemonic to help me remember it. It's cities must start doing practical equity steps. Okay, so number 1, codes, of course, very important. Number 2, money, that's the M. 3 is skills, that's the S. 4 is data, that's the doing. And let's see, pilots, that's a P, practical, pilots. Climate, that's collaboration. We need more collaboration across the stakeholder ecosystem. And very important, important. We need to embed equity and nature and inclusion into the built environment. And then we need to build a collaboration and capacity for state level implementation and to integrate climate strategy. Now, layering on that, one of the most exciting outcomes from our NDC 3.0 is the commitment. I mentioned that in passing to develop how to update our national building code to incorporate climate resilience and energy efficiency. Our building code, it dates to 2006, and even that one, to be quite honest, it hasn't been implemented. It's kind of just there, has no statutory backing. So, well, code on paper, but not really enforced. So we have that foundation. So the next thing becomes, how do we make that happen? Because we need the code in place. We need the foundation. It provides the foundation that's going to drive the subsequent action, that's going to tell the actors what they need to do, that's going to tell the investors what they can invest in, that their investment is certain. It gives them certainty. It gives them comfort and confidence in investing. So we need that. So I think that's the number one I think we need to do. But I want to pivot back to what Peter said, and I think Faith mentioned, and you mentioned about co-creation. So even in the doing, we need to be very cautious in how we go about the doing. Speaking about our NDC scorecard process, we were very intentional and careful about the process. We tried to make sure that we had, as I like to say, both the policymakers and the policy takers in the room. So it's not just those who are giving the instructions and saying, do it this way, but those who are going to be impacted and influenced by those policies. So in developing a new building code, I think we need to be very careful about how we go about it, being mindful of the fact that 70% of our construction is informal. So if you develop a code that doesn't factor that in, then the informal self-builders will simply find a workaround, will simply say, oh, how do I get around this? This doesn't work for me. So we can't have a code that is designed for cities or even the richer parts of the cities. So we need to make sure we bring everybody into the room, the experts and the non-experts, even the artisans and the masons who will tell you that this thing you've dreamt up in some university somewhere, on site, it doesn't work. So co-creation, very important. I hope I'm making sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Danjuma. And I think, as you're speaking, I think all of us are nodding because we understand that particular challenge about the informality of some of the buildings across the continent. Kennedy, I'll come to you, and it's actually a very similar question because in development of the roadmap, you've identified instruments that are required for implementation. From your perspective, what do you feel is the most important instrument? Is it procurement? Is it finance? Is it code updates? Or is it something else altogether?
Thank you very much. And I think this is the right question and the right conversation for everyone in the house. I wanted to talk particularly on the issues around the building code. Building codes are the transformation instruments that not just countries, but even sectors need to use. There is a lot of power that when you talk about the building code. In fact, when you talk about the NDCs, the specific component that discusses the building and construction sector in most of the NDCs are the building codes. In fact, in a different study under the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, talks about close to 86 countries that have submitted the NDCs discussing about the building code in one or the other. And therefore, it is important for all of us to discuss and ensure that we have a close look into operationalization of the various building code and even as sectors across board, ensure that we have updated building codes. There is that power of the building code discusses whether it is the material value chain, discusses on the issues around energy efficiencies, discusses on what my colleague from Southern Africa has actually talked about. And therefore, for us, at a policy level, the power of a sector in building and construction sector lies in how updated, how practical, how implementable our building codes are. And therefore, as different nations, different countries, different stakeholders, we need to have a keen interest of the NDC documentation, aware that NDC document localization of NDC in our own construction sector equals to a building code. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kennedy. And Faith, there is a question for you in the Q&A space, which I'll direct to you. And then I'd also ask for Peter, I'll end my question with you and you can do the closing remarks right after answering that. But because this is a knowledge learning exchange for each of the panelists, Faith and Juma, Kennedy, it would be great to ask one of your fellow panelists a question around the different initiatives that are happening, because it's about learning from what we're all doing on the ground, and we have similar challenges. So Faith, for you, the particular question that has come on the chat is around the EPCs, a good regulation for enforcing compliance. However, despite the 2nd August deadline, certain buildings are yet to comply. What are some of the enforcement measures that you are exploring or have been implemented?
Do I type or do I take the question now?
Yes,
Okay.
I think take it live. Just answer live for the sake of all our participants.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, so it's the 2nd of December, which is the compliance deadline. I think what I didn't say about the EPC is that non-compliance is actually punishable by up to 5 years in jail or up to 5 million rand. Personally, I don't know how, and the Deputy Minister agrees with me in this thinking. It's very hard for private building owners, you can take them to jail, but what about public entities? Who do you take? And of course, there's a whole definition around who the accounting officer is. It's not just an owner or a person who's leasing. We define accounting officer. So that's the person that is liable for or who goes to jail. But I don't think the ministry has any intention of sending anyone to jail. I mean, jails or prisons are overpopulated as is. It's not going to do anything for the building sector anyway. What I like, and I supported her, is the fines, especially if the fines come back to the sector to implement the many initiatives that we are behind on, or invest in baseline establishment, roadmap, even projects that will contribute towards decarbonization in buildings. So that I can support. And yes, the Deputy Minister, because we report energy efficiency and demand side management to the Deputy Minister of the Department of Electricity and Energy. So she did say that it is unlikely that they will implement the jail aspect of the fine, rather the financial component of it, which I think is fantastic. If it affects the bottom line, then you are quick to act. So yeah, that's what we are enforcing and pushing now with the countdown.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith. And to give you the opportunity, do you have any question for Kennedy or Danjuma based on the work that's happening in in Nigeria and Kenya?
Look, I always have questions for our African counterparts, but I think for me, it would be, everybody spoke about some of the wonderful things that are happening there. And I think generally I understand some of the issues around financing or funding or financing mechanism. And that's really my topic, because I still believe that if we go collectively, or if we request or ask collectively, chances are we will get a favorable response. But in getting together and going for pool funding, we need to understand some of the priorities for each country. So maybe just both Danjuma and Kennedy, in terms of your priority, if you were to be granted one wish and one wish alone, regardless of how unrealistic it is, what would you want to fund? And you could do it today.
Well, let me go first. This is personal for me. I think it's simply, and I think it's for all of us in Africa, it's affordable housing. My personal vision is a green home for everybody. In fact, the way I try to define it is that we come to a place where we no longer have green buildings, we just have buildings. Kind of like when I was younger, we had electric light, we had this light, but now everybody just says turn on the light and you know what they mean. You don't need to add the appellation green to it. So we need to, it seems like a unicorn, something you talk about, but you've not really seen. But I believe it's possible, and I believe there's a lot of work being done around it in other parts of the world. So we need to look for how we can bring it in to our context, and that needs money. It needs investment for innovation, for research, and especially for pilots. We need proofs of concept. We need to take the solutions to the ground and actually test them and see, are they practical, are they delivering? So affordable housing, we really need it. And not just because what we are building that we call affordable is not climate resilient. It's not energy efficient. It's often not safe. And it's far away in the peripheries of the towns where people are disconnected from their social networks. So let me stop preaching. Thank you.
Thank you. Kennedy, over to you.
Thank you. I actually wanted to reiterate on what my colleague Danjuma said, because he was almost reading my mind around this conversation, and that if there is one power of a country to demonstrate how best we are doing climate actions in our construction sector is actually in relations to affordable housing programs. The recent COP called climate, the recent COP30 that is happening at Belém, the global call in the building and construction sector is on how best countries, state and non-state actors, can push forward sustainable and affordable housing. That is the global priority for all countries within all our state and non-state actors. And therefore, I just wanted to reiterate what Dajuma said and indicate that we need to support various initiatives arising from different stakeholders, especially different governments, so that we have demonstrable and practical affordable housing for our own people to create the very impact that we are looking into across board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kennedy. And I think maybe in the interest of time, I'll shift over to Peter. And there are a lot of things that are coming out from this particular conversation. So I want to encourage the speakers and the attendees that this is really the first of many knowledge learning opportunities in terms of cross-learning. And I can already see, I already have picked so many things that we need to follow up on how we're going to sort of interact across the three countries. So I want to thank all the speakers. And Peter, I think I won't even go to my question for you because I feel like there's so much content, and really where Kennedy ended on sustainable and affordable housing and Faith and Danjuma is a good starting point. So over to you, Peter, to give us your closing remarks.
Yeah, Faith, that was a fabulous question to ask everybody. And I think the answer that came, universal access to sustainable housing, sustainable, affordable housing, it's one of the critical issues of our time, of course, and it is indeed an amazing indicator of progress, so much more profound in many ways than, achieving zero emissions. I think, our experience, working to support governments and industry to decarbonize the building sector has been that when we shift the narrative to health, human welfare, human rights, we start to hit a much stronger political will for change. And indeed, Kennedy, to your point, the focus often comes back to, well, the building regulations are a social contract, and they should be a social contract which guarantees people their human rights. And of course, we have in the Universal Charter of Human Rights a right to adequate housing. And I think we can, then Jimmy, you started off, glass half empty in a way and came with the glass half full. toward the end, but I think it's important to be realistic about the starting points and the challenges, and not let that stop the impetus for progress. And I think all of us here have learned so much from yourself and Faith and Kennedy about what progress means, not just in terms of the technical activities and the kinds of actions that you are putting into your roadmaps and so forth, but what's the big why behind all of that, which is an aspiration to do better for your communities, and sees this opportunity, I think, that of Africa as a major source of new development in the world, to show a new way. And, you know, Kennedy, you mentioned the buildings breakthrough and, you know, global platforms. I think that's very interesting. GBPN is an implementing partner in the buildings breakthrough. And you mentioned that this helps us understand how global ambition can be locally implemented. And I think that's right. But I would say also, we can see that climate leadership is shifting from the north to the south and from the west to the east. And that is because your regions represent the most populous, the most vulnerable, the fastest developing, and you've got more to gain. And so what I would say is that these kinds of dialogues and international exchange and the buildings breakthrough enable local implementation and results to drive global ambition. And I think that's what we're seeing, and what we've heard today is there are results. There is ambition, and we're seeing that very, very systematically being designed for implementation. And the three things that came out of all of your presentations for me are very important common themes. One of them is people. And again, this is a framework that we also operating in GBPN, but, you know, start with the people, the doers. Who's responsible for getting up on Monday morning and doing something differently? They're the people who have to be in the room. And that locally grounded knowledge, it's not necessarily institutionalized, but it could be cultural. And it's important to start with that. Second thing is the data. Bring the data. Or if you haven't got data, don't let that be a reason to not start. That could be the first thing on your list after finding the right people, is the data. And I think all of you made important points about how important data is to establish ambition, to be able to know what you don't know, Faith. Like, when you said we don't know what we don't know, if we don't have the data, that's true. And I think that also helps us with the metrics for progress and identify what's possible, and it aligns finance and gives confidence. I loved what you said about risk and sort of finance coming with perceived risks, and that I think from our point of view, we work in a range of countries which are perceived to be very complex from the top down or from the outside looking in. But if you're engaging with local expertise, it's not that complicated. People know how the systems work. And so the perception of risk is different. And I really liked what you said about that. Don't wait for anybody else to understand the risks. And I think what's really heartening about this discussion today is just hearing the exchange between these three great countries and you great leaders about what it means and what decarbonisation means, what striving for sustainable housing and affordability means, what protecting human rights means, and how this is all wrapped up in a common goal, which is to address this challenge of climate change. So thank you so much for your energy and input. Thanks for all the work that you're doing on the ground in your countries. We have all, I think, learnt so much, and we really look forward to moving forward with you. I would like to add to Muguri's list, integrating green environmental performance into affordable housing. That's something that we're doing in Indonesia and India at scale at the moment. So be very happy to follow up on those things. And yes, baselining and making sure that we've got the data and the evidence base there to support the code revisions and make sure that we've got the ambition and we're counting the benefits as we go. So thanks again. And I'm so inspired. Really appreciate everything that you've done. Thanks to the GBPN team too for putting this together, and Mugure for hosting us.
Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, GBPN.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much,
Thank
colleagues.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you and bye. Bye.